The rain came down hard that night in Portland, the kind that made the streets shine like silver ribbons under the streetlights. Emma sat in her living room, staring at the dark window. The house was quiet, too quiet. Since Daniel's death 2 years ago, silence had become her only company. The walls still carried faint echoes of laughter, but the warmth had long faded. She had learned to live with the emptiness, though it still crept up on nights like this. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Lily, her college friend. "Hey Em, do you still have that guest room? My cousin's moving to Portland for work and can't find a place yet, just for a short while." Emma stared at the message for a moment. She hadn't had anyone stay in her house since Daniel's passing. The idea of another person, especially a stranger, unsettled her. But something inside her, maybe the loneliness she had learned to hide, told her to say yes. After a short pause, she replied, "Sure, he can stay. Send me his details." 2 days later, he arrived. It was late afternoon when Emma opened the door to see a man standing on her porch with a travel bag slung over his shoulder. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with calm gray eyes that seemed both kind and weary. "You must be Emma," he said, offering a polite smile. "I'm Ethan. Thank you for letting me stay." His voice was steady, warm. Emma smiled back, though a little nervous. "Of course, come in. I hope the rain didn't ruin your trip." He laughed softly. "I've seen worse." "It's Portland. The rain's part of the deal." She led him inside, showing him the guest room. It was simple. Clean sheets, a desk, and a window facing the garden. "If you need anything, just ask," she said. Ethan nodded, grateful. "I'll try not to be a bother, just until I find my own place." Over the next few days, Emma realized how much she had forgotten what it felt like to have another person around. She'd hear soft footsteps in the hallway, the sound of coffee brewing before she woke, and occasionally faint music coming from the guest room. Ethan wasn't noisy or invasive, just quietly present. They began talking during breakfast. It started with small talk, the weather, work, Portland's unpredictable streets. Then slowly, the conversation stretched longer. Emma learned that Ethan was an architect who had just left a stressful job in Seattle. "I needed a fresh start," he said one morning, stirring sugar into his coffee. She understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. One evening, while tidying the living room, Ethan noticed a guitar resting in the corner. Its strings were dusty, untouched. "Do you play?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "No, my husband used to. He tried teaching me once, but I wasn't any good." Ethan picked up the guitar carefully, testing the strings. "Mind if I?" She nodded. And when he began to play, the sound filled the house with something Emma hadn't felt in years. Life. His fingers moved gently over the strings, and for the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel the weight of the empty house pressing down on her. She sat quietly, listening, a faint smile breaking through her guarded calm. When he finished, Ethan looked up and smiled. "It sounds better than it looks." Emma laughed softly. "You made it sound beautiful." That became their quiet ritual. After dinner, he'd sometimes play while she sat by the fire, sipping tea. He didn't talk much about himself, but there was something about his silence that spoke louder than words. He carried an air of mystery, like someone who had lost something too but never said what. On the 4th night, they sat outside under the covered porch, listening to the rain. The garden glistened under the dim porch light, and the sound of water hitting the leaves felt strangely comforting. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," Emma said suddenly. Not sure why the words left her mouth. Ethan took a long breath before replying. "Maybe, or maybe I just needed somewhere quiet enough to hear myself think again." She nodded. "Quiet can help, but it can also remind you of everything you've lost." He looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was no need to. The air between them felt heavy with things both understood but left unsaid. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that look, the quiet sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own reflection too closely. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she felt a connection, gentle, fragile, but real. The next morning, she found a note on the kitchen counter. Ethan had gone for an early walk, but had left breakfast ready: coffee, eggs, and toast. He'd even left a small flower in a glass beside her cup. She smiled, feeling an unfamiliar warmth rise inside her. She told herself it was nothing, just kindness. But something inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, her heart was beginning to remember how to feel again. That evening, when he returned, she noticed something different. He seemed distant, lost in thought. "Everything okay?" she asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just some memories caught up with me today." Emma wanted to ask more, but didn't. She simply said, "You don't have to hide your sadness here." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe one day I'll tell you everything." And with that, he disappeared into his room, leaving Emma with 100 questions and one undeniable truth. Something between them was shifting. Later that night, as she turned off the lights, Emma caught herself thinking, why does he feel so familiar? She didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would soon unravel everything, and what Ethan would eventually tell her would change how she saw her past, her grief, and herself. The house that once felt empty had begun to breathe again, and Emma didn't realize how much that would matter until it was too late. The next few days passed quietly, but the silence between Emma and Ethan began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. It carried a strange comfort, a warmth that neither of them could explain. They had fallen into an easy rhythm of sharing space, each respecting the other's quiet. Emma found herself looking forward to mornings again, when she'd find the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the house and Ethan humming softly in the kitchen. One morning, she walked in to find him sketching something on the kitchen table. Sheets of paper were spread out, rough sketches of houses, gardens, and windows. "You're working?" she asked curiously. He looked up and smiled. "Trying to. It's been a while since I designed anything worth showing. But this house," he said, glancing around, "it has a kind of peace I haven't felt in years. It helps me think." She was surprised. "This house?" he nodded. "It feels like it's lived through love and loss." Emma looked down, feeling her chest tighten. "You're not wrong." For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but stopped himself. Emma wanted to ask what weighed on his mind, but something told her to wait. She had learned that silence often said more than words. That evening, they had dinner together again. It had become their quiet ritual. Emma cooked while Ethan set the table. They talked about books, music, and memories, little stories that made them laugh. But as the night deepened, their conversation grew more personal. "Did you ever think about leaving this place?" Ethan asked softly. Emma shook her head. "Not really. Every part of this house reminds me of him, my husband. Leaving would feel like forgetting him." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes staying can hurt just as much as leaving." She looked at him, noticing that familiar sadness behind his calm eyes. "You talk like someone who's lost something too." He smiled faintly, almost like he'd been caught. "Maybe I have." For a second, the air between them changed. The sound of rain outside, the faint flicker of candlelight, the way he looked at her. It all felt heavier, deeper. Then, as if realizing it, he looked away and changed the subject. Later that night, Emma sat alone in the living room. She tried reading, but her thoughts kept returning to him. His quiet kindness, the way he listened without judgment, the way he filled the empty spaces without trying. She told herself she was just grateful for his company, that it was nothing more. But deep down, she knew something inside her was waking up, something she had buried since Daniel's death. The next day, she found Ethan in the garden, fixing the old fence Daniel had once built. "You don't have to do that," she said, stepping closer. He smiled. "I wanted to. It gives me something to focus on." She watched him work, noticing how at ease he seemed there, as if he belonged. "You're good with your hands," she said, without thinking, then laughed softly at how that sounded. Ethan chuckled too. "Years of designing buildings helps," he replied. When the fence was done, they stood there side by side, admiring it. It looks stronger than before, Emma said. Sometimes things can be rebuilt, he said quietly. Even after they break. The words lingered with her long after he went inside. That evening, they shared dinner again, homemade soup and bread. The power flickered during the storm, so they lit candles. The soft glow made the room feel smaller, more intimate. They talked for hours, their stories weaving together like threads in the same fabric. Ethan spoke about his childhood, his love for architecture, and his decision to leave Seattle. I thought I had everything I wanted, he said. But sometimes success doesn't mean peace. Emma nodded slowly. Peace is harder to find than love, I think. He looked at her with quiet intensity. You've found both once. That's rare, her chest tightened. And lost both, too. He didn't reply. But the way he looked at her, with understanding, not pity, made her heart ache in a way that felt strangely alive. Later, when she went upstairs, she noticed the door to the guest room was slightly open. Inside, Ethan was sitting by the window, lost in thought. On the small table beside him lay an old photograph. She recognized it, Daniel's guitar, the same one Ethan had been playing. Before she could say anything, Ethan turned. Their eyes met. I didn't mean to go through your things, he said quickly. I just found this. Emma smiled faintly. It's fine. That guitar was his favorite. You play it well. He hesitated, then asked softly, do you ever wonder if he'd want you to move on? The question hit harder than she expected. Sometimes, she admitted. But guilt doesn't leave easily. Ethan looked down. I know that feeling. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her not to. There was a story there, one he wasn't ready to tell. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the thought. Who was Ethan really running from, and what pain hid behind that calm voice and gentle smile? The next morning, she found a note on the kitchen counter again. Went for a drive. Needed to clear my head. Be back before dinner. But evening came, and Ethan didn't return. The storm rolled in again, the rain tapping hard against the windows. Emma tried reading, pacing, checking her phone, but the worry in her chest grew heavier by the minute. Finally, around midnight, she heard the door open. Ethan walked in, soaked and pale. Where have you been? She asked, trying to sound calm but failing. I just drove around, he said softly, running a hand through his wet hair. I shouldn't have stayed away so long. She handed him a towel, trying to hide the relief in her eyes. You scared me. He looked at her for a long moment. I didn't mean to. Something about the way he said it made her heart twist. There was sorrow in his voice, deep and real. And she knew something was coming. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. Emma, there's something I need to tell you. Her heart froze. He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't just come here for work. There's another reason I ended up in this house. The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain. Emma felt her throat tighten as she whispered, What reason? Ethan met her eyes, his expression torn between fear and honesty. Because your husband once saved my life. And before she could say anything, the lights flickered out, leaving them in darkness, with only the truth hanging between them. The lights flickered again, before settling into darkness. The storm outside rumbled like an echo of the moment. Emma stood still, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. What do you mean? My husband saved your life, she asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Ethan hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. It was 3 years ago before the accident. I was driving home late from a project in Portland. It was raining heavily. I lost control of my car on a curve and ended up in a ditch. A man stopped to help me. He pulled me out before the car caught fire. That man was Daniel. Emma's eyes widened. Her chest tightened as she took a shaky breath. Daniel? Ethan nodded slowly. I didn't know his name at the time. He told me later when I called to thank him. We talked a few times after that. He told me about this house, about you. He said you were his home, his calm in the chaos. I never met him again, but a few months later, I saw his name in a newspaper. About the accident. The weight of his words hit Emma like a wave. She sat down, trying to steady herself. "You knew him," she whispered. "I owed him my life," Ethan said quietly. "I thought coming here might help me. I don't know, make sense of it. I didn't expect to find you. I didn't even know this was his house until I saw the photo by the stairs." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Then Emma stood, her eyes glistening with tears. "So you came here because of guilt?" "Because of gratitude," he said quickly. "I wanted to help somehow. I thought maybe fixing the house, helping with the renovation, it would honor him. But then I met you, and everything became more complicated." Emma turned away, her emotions tangled. Confusion, sadness, something else she didn't want to name. "You should have told me." "I know," Ethan said softly, "but I didn't want you to think I came here out of pity." She looked at him, searching his face for truth. His eyes held no lies, only quiet regret. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly. "The way you listen, the way you care about small things." Ethan looked down, his voice breaking slightly. "He was a good man. I wish I'd known him better." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept hearing Ethan's voice, kept seeing Daniel's smile in her memory. The idea that her husband had once saved this man, and now that same man was living in her house, felt unreal. Like fate had drawn invisible lines between them long before they met. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the windows, golden and soft. Emma walked downstairs and found Ethan packing his bag near the living room. "You're leaving?" she asked quietly. He looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I think it's better if I go. I didn't mean to make things harder for you." Her heart ached at the thought. "You didn't. You brought something back here that I thought I'd lost. Life." He stopped, unsure what to say. She stepped closer. "Daniel wouldn't want you to run. If he trusted you enough to save your life, maybe he wanted you to live it, not carry his ghost." Ethan's throat tightened. "You're stronger than you think, Emma," she smiled faintly. "So are you. That's probably why you both survived what others couldn't." He looked at her for a long moment, then put his bag down. "If you still want me to stay, I'll finish what I started." She nodded. "Stay." Over the next few weeks, things shifted between them, subtly but deeply. They repaired the porch, painted the walls, and restored Daniel's old study. Working side by side, they didn't talk much about the past anymore. They focused on small things. The way light hit the windows, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of laughter slowly returning to the house. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Emma found an old box labeled "For Emma." Inside were letters Daniel had written but never given her. Short notes about love, fear, and forgiveness. The last letter stopped her breath. It said, "If I'm ever gone, promise me you'll let life find you again. Don't stay in the dark." Tears filled her eyes as she closed the box. That evening, she gave one of the letters to Ethan. "He wrote this before he died. Maybe it's meant for both of us now." Ethan read it quietly, his eyes glistening. "He sounds like he understood everything before it happened." Emma nodded. "He did. He always did." The air between them grew heavier, not sad, but filled with something unspoken. A connection too deep to name. That night, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Emma turned to him. "Do you ever think fate brings people together for a reason?" Ethan smiled gently. "I used to think it was just coincidence, but after meeting you, I'm not so sure." She looked away, her heart beating faster. "It feels like Daniel led you here." "Maybe he did," Ethan said softly. "Maybe he knew we both needed to heal." For a while, they just sat there in silence, listening to the evening breeze. There was no rush, no need for words. Everything that mattered was already there, in the quiet understanding between them. Days turned into weeks. The house that once felt empty now felt alive again. Emma laughed more, slept better, and even started painting again. Ethan found inspiration, too. He began sketching new designs, telling her he wanted to build something lasting, something that symbolized new beginnings. But beneath it all, they both knew this calm wouldn't last forever. Ethan's work contract would end soon. He would have to leave. The thought hung quietly in the air, unspoken but felt. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Emma finally asked, "When do you leave?" Ethan paused. "A week," her heart sank. "And after that?" He looked at her, his voice soft. "I don't know, but I'll carry this place, and you, with me." She smiled sadly. "You don't have to carry me. Just remember," he nodded, "always." The night before he left, Emma found him sitting by the piano Daniel once played. Ethan turned as she entered. "I'll miss this house," he said. She stepped closer. "You'll miss the house?" He smiled faintly. "And the woman who made it feel like home." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air charged with everything unsaid. Then Emma whispered, "Maybe this isn't goodbye. Maybe it's just another beginning." Ethan looked at her, eyes full of emotion. "Then I hope fate is kind enough to let it continue." As dawn broke the next day, Ethan left. The house felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. His sketches, his laughter, his presence, they lingered like sunlight on old walls. Weeks later, Emma received a letter. Inside was a drawing of a house, her house, surrounded by blooming gardens. At the bottom, Ethan had written, "He saved my life." You gave it meaning. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from peace. She looked out the window, smiling softly at the morning light. Somehow, she knew this wasn't the end of their story, just a pause before the next chapter. Winter arrived quietly that year. The trees outside Emma's window stood bare, their branches trembling under the cold wind. It had been 3 months since Ethan left. The house, once filled with his laughter and the sound of tools and conversation, now seemed still again. But unlike before, the silence wasn't heavy. It was calm, like a heartbeat that had finally settled. Emma had changed in those months. She started teaching art classes at the local community center, something Daniel used to encourage her to do. She met new people, smiled more often, and even began sleeping through the night. Still, there were moments when she'd catch herself setting an extra cup of coffee on the table or glancing at the porch expecting to see Ethan fixing something. The ache of missing him wasn't painful anymore. It was warm, like remembering something beautiful you once had. One morning, as she was leaving the house, she found an envelope at the door. There was no name, just a small sketch on the front, a maple leaf, the same kind that surrounded her backyard. Her heart skipped as she opened it. Inside was a short note. "I'm back in town. If you're free, meet me where the sunrise touches the water." She didn't need to guess who it was from. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the letter into her coat pocket. That afternoon, she drove to the small lake just outside town, the same one Daniel used to take her to on quiet weekends. When she arrived, the sun was low, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. And there he was, Ethan, standing near the water, hands in his pockets, waiting. He turned as she approached, a smile spreading slowly across his face. "You came," she nodded, her breath misting in the cool air. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "I didn't either," he admitted. But life has a way of bringing people back when they're meant to finish what they started. They stood in silence for a moment, just watching the light ripple across the lake. Then Emma said softly, "You didn't have to come back for me." He looked at her, his eyes gentle. "I didn't come back for you. I came back because of what you taught me. That life isn't about repaying debts. It's about sharing what's left of the good in us." Her eyes softened. "You found peace?" He nodded. "Enough to know where I belong." They sat on a bench near the water, their conversation flowing easily, like they had never been apart. Ethan told her about his new job, designing homes that felt more like memories than buildings. Emma told him about her students, how she'd painted again after years of stopping. Each story felt like a missing piece finding its place. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made something for you." Inside was a miniature sculpture, a replica of her house carved in delicate detail. The porch, the garden, even the piano inside the window, all captured perfectly. Emma traced her fingers over it, her voice trembling. "It's beautiful," he smiled faintly. "I wanted you to have something that reminds you the house isn't just walls. It's a story, one that doesn't end with loss." Tears filled her eyes. "You always know what to say." He looked at her quietly. "Not always, but I know what I feel." The air between them grew still. There was no rush, no need for explanations. Everything they'd held back, the pain, the gratitude, the quiet affection, seemed to meet in that moment. Finally, Emma spoke. "Daniel once wrote that I should let life find me again. I think maybe it did." Ethan's voice was soft. "Maybe it found us both." They smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that said more than words could. Weeks passed after that day. Ethan started working in town again, and though he didn't move back into her house, he visited often. They rebuilt parts of the garden together, planted flowers, and restored the fence Daniel had built years ago. It wasn't about replacing memories. It was about adding new ones beside the old. One evening, as they finished planting tulips by the porch, Emma looked at the sky. "You ever think about how strange life is? How one act of kindness, saving a stranger, can change so many lives after?" Ethan leaned on the shovel, nodding. "I think about it every day. And I think about how maybe Daniel didn't just save me. Maybe he wanted us both to find what we lost. Hope," she smiled, her eyes glistening. "He'd be happy to see this place now. It feels alive again." Ethan looked at her, his expression tender. "It's alive because you let it be." That night they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars appear. There was a quiet peace in their closeness. Not the wild rush of new love, but something gentler, deeper. The kind that grows slowly, like roots finding their way through soil. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "When I first met you, I thought you were a stranger passing through my grief. But now I see you were meant to be part of the healing." He turned to her. "And you were mine." Time moved softly after that. Spring turned to summer, and the house bloomed again. Laughter in the kitchen, the smell of fresh paint, the sound of music playing from the old piano. They didn't rush anything, didn't label what they had. It was enough to know they had found each other in the quietest part of their lives and decided to stay. One afternoon, Emma found herself sitting at the same lake where they'd met again months ago. The water sparkled under the sunlight. Ethan joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and said, "I talked to the town board. They want to restore the lakeside cabins for artists. I told them I know someone who'd make the perfect mentor." She smiled, shaking her head. "You never stop finding ways to surprise me," he grinned. "That's the plan." They sat quietly, watching the reflection of clouds drift across the surface. Then Emma said softly, "Do you ever wonder if Daniel knows? That his one act of kindness brought all this?" Ethan's voice was low. "I think he does. Maybe that's why the world feels right again." The breeze brushed against them, carrying the scent of pine and water. Emma felt her heart settle, not in sadness, but in gratitude. She finally understood that love didn't have to end when someone left. It could live on, change shape, and still lead you to new beginnings. As they stood to leave, she turned to him. "Ethan, yeah? Thank you for staying when you didn't have to." He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I didn't stay out of duty, Emma. I stayed because home isn't a place. It's a feeling, and I found mine here." They walked back together as the sun began to set, their shadows stretching long behind them. 2 lives once broken, now quietly whole again. The world around them glowed in warm light, as if even the universe approved of this ending. Emma glanced back at the lake one last time and whispered under her breath, "He stayed in my house, and I'll never forget what happened next." And this time she smiled, because what happened next wasn't pain or loss. It was healing, love, and the start of a life she thought she'd never have again.